Hello detectives, welcome back to Criminal Minds True Stories, where today we delve into a case as chilling as it is heartbreaking. In this story, we explore Herbert Baumeister cases. Prepare yourself, find a quiet place, and put on your headphones, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you think you know. Step into the shadows with me as we unravel this dark and unsettling mystery. I first heard about Herbert Baumeister on a rainy afternoon, scrolling through old crime forums out of morbid curiosity. His name came up in a thread about unsolved disappearances in the Midwest. At first glance, the story seemed too outlandish to be real. A businessman, father and husband, hiding a nightmare within the confines of his own home. But the more I read, the more I felt an odd, lingering chill. People in the forum spoke about Fox Hollow Farm, his sprawling estate just outside Indianapolis, where countless remains had been found. It wasn't just a house, it was a tomb. And what made it worse was how he'd managed to keep it hidden for so long, right under the noses of everyone who thought they knew him. What struck me most were the stories from those who'd known him in passing. Employees, acquaintances, even friends. They described Herbert as polite, sometimes eccentric, but never outwardly disturbing. It's like he had this perfect mask, a respectable front that shielded the monster lurking beneath. People talked about him running Save-A-Lot thrift stores, a business that made him well known around town, even respected. But while his family saw him as a devoted husband and father, his other life unraveled in Indianapolis's gay bars, where young men had started disappearing without a trace. They'd walk in, maybe catch his eye, and that would be it, the last time anyone would ever see them alive. It's haunting to think how easily he seemed to blend into both worlds, never once slipping up. The thing about Fox Hollow Farm is that it looks unassuming, almost serene. I've seen pictures of the place, a big house sitting on 18 acres of woods, like something out of a suburban dream. But knowing what happened there, it's hard not to feel a shiver just imagining it. From the outside, you'd never guess the secrets buried beneath that ground. In 1996, when the authorities first searched the property, what they found was beyond anyone's worst nightmare. Scattered across the yard, hidden in patches of soil and under layers of leaves, were thousands of bone fragments, shattered and burned beyond recognition. It was like someone had tried to erase people bit by bit, as if their existence could be wiped out entirely. The police later confirmed that the bones belonged to at least 11 people, but experts believe there could be even more. It's unsettling to think how long this went unnoticed. Neighbors saw smoke coming from the backyard occasionally, but they thought it was just Herbert burning trash. In reality, he was destroying evidence, scattering remains in a twisted ritual that went undetected for years. To him, Fox Hollow wasn't just a home, it was a hunting ground, a place where he felt safe enough to hide his crimes in plain sight. I can't help but wonder how he managed to live with it, coming home, kissing his kids goodnight, then heading out to stalk his next victim. It's a level of coldness that's hard to wrap your head around. The reports say he'd lure men back to his place, promising a good time, maybe even some harmless fun. But once they were inside those walls, it was anything but safe. He was calculated, careful, making sure no one ever saw what he was really capable of. It's as if he lived for that rush, the thrill of leading someone to their end while keeping his own life intact, untouched. Even his own wife didn't know what was happening right under her nose, and that's what makes it all so terrifying. Juliana, his wife, later said she had no idea about the things happening right outside their back door. She claimed she was completely oblivious, only becoming suspicious after finding strange things in their house, like mannequins Herbert kept around. He said they were for decor, but in hindsight, it feels like something far darker, almost like he was preparing or practicing. She told the police that he'd sometimes go off without saying where he was going, but she thought he was just stressed from work. Turns out, the reality was something far worse than she could ever imagine. One story that stuck with me was from the investigator who first set foot on that property after they got permission to search. They described the eerie silence, how the place felt off, before they even uncovered the remains. As they walked around, it was like the very air was thick with something dark, something heavy. I mean, imagine realizing you're standing on someone's final resting place, and not just one person, but possibly dozens. The search team knew they were stepping into something that went beyond their usual cases, something horrific, and every step seemed to confirm it. And then there were the bones. They weren't hidden in any deep graves or marked with anything that would show respect or remorse. No, they were scattered like trash, spread out in shallow dirt patches, mixed with the soil. It was almost as if he didn't care if they were found or not, like he felt untouchable. Investigators had to sift through the dirt for days, piecing together fragments to understand just how many lives had ended there. The sheer amount of bone fragments found was staggering. Bits of jawbones, vertebrae, pieces of skulls. It was a grim jigsaw puzzle, one that could never be fully completed. What's haunting is that some of the bones were so small, so crushed, that experts couldn't even identify all the victims. They were just fragments of people who had once had lives, dreams, maybe families waiting for them. To think that he just scattered them there, as if they were nothing more than refuse, it's disturbing, doesn't even begin to cover it. There's something deeply unsettling about the fact that he didn't even try to hide it well, almost like he was daring someone to find out. I guess he thought he was invincible, living this double life without consequence. As news spread, the local community went into shock. People who had once smiled at him in the grocery store, who'd brought their kids to play dates with his children, were now horrified. I remember reading about how one neighbor said she had spoken to Herbert a few times and thought he was odd but nice. That's the thing about people like him. They blend in, they hide behind a facade of normalcy. It's like they're wearing a mask, and by the time anyone realizes what's underneath, it's already too late. For years he'd fooled everyone around him, and that's what makes this whole story so bone-chilling. There was this one detail that really got to me. Herbert apparently used to show his son where he'd been working in the yard. The kid was just a child, oblivious, thinking his dad was just gardening or something. Little did he know he was standing on the remnants of his father's horrifying secret. It's twisted to think about. Him calmly showing his son around the very place he'd discarded his victims, like it was nothing more than some weekend project. And then, after leading this tour of his own private graveyard, he'd just go back to his everyday life as if nothing had happened. The search didn't end there, though. They even found a few bones in the creek that ran through the property. It's like he had no boundaries, no place sacred enough to keep free from his crimes. The investigators dredged the creek and the surrounding woods, finding remains scattered across the entire area. I can't imagine what it was like for his family, seeing their entire world crumble around them. All that time, they'd thought they were living a normal life, completely unaware of the horrors just outside their windows. As the investigation continued, more disturbing details came to light. Herbert's visits to gay bars around Indianapolis were no secret to those who frequented the scene. He was known, though no one really knew much about him. Some survivors even came forward after the news broke, recounting unsettling encounters where he'd tried to lure them back to his place. They talked about how he had this eerie calmness, a way of speaking that seemed almost hypnotic. And of course, no one suspected anything sinister at the time. They just figured he was an odd guy. But looking back, those encounters took on a much darker significance. And then there was his escape. Once the authorities got close enough to press charges, Herbert fled to Canada, leaving behind everything: his business, his family, his life. He drove across the border and ended up in Pinery Provincial Park, Ontario. There, on July 3rd, 1996, they found him dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. In his suicide note, he blamed stress, his failing marriage, his business falling apart. But here's the chilling part. He didn't confess to a single murder. Not one word about the lives he'd taken, the devastation he'd caused. It's as if he was determined to carry his secrets to the grave, leaving everyone haunted by unanswered questions. Even after his death, the mystery surrounding Herbert Baumeister didn't end. Authorities continued to work tirelessly on identifying the remains, combing through DNA and dental records, hoping to give families some kind of closure. But many of the victims still remain unidentified to this day. It's haunting to think that there are families out there who still don't know what happened to their loved ones, unaware that they became part of such a grim story. The property itself, Fox Hollow Farm, has become almost infamous, a place forever marked by the horrors that happened there, a reminder of the lives that were so carelessly ended. Some people believe the place is haunted, that there's a lingering presence left behind. Current owners have reported strange occurrences, noises in the night, shadows moving across the property. Some say they've even seen figures in the woods, as if the souls of those young men are still trapped there, unable to find peace. It sounds like something out of a ghost story, but after everything that's happened, who could blame them for feeling that way? It's not just a house anymore. It's a part of Indiana's dark history, a place that serves as a reminder of the evil that can lurk behind even the most ordinary faces. Even after his death, the shadow of what he did lingered. Fox Hollow Farm became infamous, a place forever tainted by the horrors he committed there. People started talking about it, how it felt wrong even to step foot on the property. Rumors circulated that you could still feel his presence there, as if some part of him never left. There were whispers of hauntings, strange sounds, and cold spots in the very places where remains had been found. I remember reading about a couple who moved into the house years later. They swore they'd seen figures in the woods, shadows that seemed to flicker and disappear. It's hard to tell if that's just folklore or something more sinister. What makes this story so chilling is how little closure there is. Even now, decades later, some of his victims still haven't been identified. Their families are left wondering, haunted by the uncertainty, by the slim hope that maybe, just maybe, their loved one is still out there. The police appealed to the public, asking for DNA samples from families with missing relatives in hopes of bringing some answers. It's heartbreaking to think of those families still waiting, their lives forever on pause because of this man. The fear, the grief, it never really fades, not when there are still so many unknowns. And then there's the possibility that we'll never truly know the extent of his crimes. Herbert was also linked to the I-70 Strangler case, where several men were murdered along Interstate 70 in Indiana and Ohio. The methods, the victims, everything lined up too perfectly to ignore. But since he died before being officially charged, no one can confirm it for sure. It's terrifying to think about. The idea that he may have left even more destruction in his wake, scattered across multiple states. That's the worst part about serial killers like him. They leave questions that can never fully be answered. We're left piecing together fragments, hoping to make sense of a puzzle that was never meant to be solved. To this day, people are still trying to put a face to all of his victims. Thanks to advances in DNA technology, some families have finally received closure, decades after their loved ones went missing. But for many, there are still no answers. Each unidentified bone fragment, each piece of evidence left behind at Fox Hollow serves as a reminder of the lives cut short. It's like they're frozen in time, forever tied to that place and the nightmare he created. Herbert's story isn't just about a man who hid his darkness behind a smile. It's about all those lives he snuffed out, the families he left shattered, and the fear he's still managing to inspire even from beyond the grave. There's something profoundly unsettling about how ordinary he seemed, even in his final days. People like him don't wear their evil on the outside. They blend in, and that's what makes them so dangerous. His wife and kids were left to pick up the pieces, forever associated with his crimes despite their innocence. Imagine finding out that someone you loved and trusted was capable of something so horrific. It would change everything, every memory, every shared moment, tainted by the knowledge of what he'd done. It's hard to imagine how they've moved on, how you ever recover from something like that. They were victims too, in their own way, forced to live with his legacy of horror. Sometimes, when I think about this case, it feels like something out of a nightmare. Like it can't possibly be real, but it is. People lived this. Families were torn apart and lives were destroyed, all because of one man's twisted desires. And that's what sticks with me, the reality of it. This wasn't some urban legend or ghost story, it was real life, and it happened in broad daylight, right under everyone's noses. Herbert Baumeister wasn't some boogeyman hiding in the shadows. He was a man walking among us, smiling at his neighbors, running a business, and raising a family. That's the scariest part. He could have been anyone. Even now, years later, people still talk about Fox Hollow Farm. It's almost become a sort of dark landmark, a place where people can't help but wonder about the horrors that took place there. Some visitors claim they feel an overwhelming sense of dread the moment they step onto the property. They say it's like the air changes, like there's something lingering just out of sight. I've read accounts from ghost hunters and thrill seekers who visited, trying to capture evidence of the energy that remains. Whether or not you believe in that kind of thing, it's hard to deny the atmosphere of a place marked by so much death. It's like every part of the farm has absorbed the darkness that once lived there. To this day, Herbert's story sends chills down my spine. The idea that someone could hide such a monstrous side while leading a seemingly normal life is terrifying. It makes you question everyone around you, your neighbors, the people you pass on the street. How many of them are hiding something dark, something unimaginable? When you hear stories like his, it's hard not to wonder just how many others out there have secrets like his, hidden beneath a polite smile or a friendly wave. And as much as we try to make sense of what he did, the truth is we'll probably never understand it. That's the lingering horror of Herbert Baumeister. He leaves us with questions that no one can answer. In the end, the story of Herbert Baumeister isn't just about a man who committed unspeakable acts. It's about all the lives that crossed his path, unknowingly walking into something dark and deadly. Each person he encountered, each person who trusted him, they were all part of a twisted game he played, hiding in plain sight. It's unsettling to think of how easy it was for him, how natural he seemed as he went about his day-to-day life. Even now, those who knew him, who brushed past him on the street or in a bar, must feel a haunting chill knowing what he was capable of. His story serves as a grim reminder that evil isn't always obvious. It often hides right in front of us, in the people we least suspect, and that's where it ends, abruptly and without the comfort of closure. The families, the victims, the people who've walked away, haunted by what happened at Fox Hollow Farm, they're left with pieces of a story they'll never fully understand. Herbert took his secrets to the grave, and in doing so, he left a scar on everyone touched by his actions. Some people say the past doesn't really stay buried, and in cases like his, I think they're right. There's a part of him that will always linger, a shadow that will never fade, keeping his victims tied to that place, to those woods, as if they're waiting for something, anything, that might finally set them free. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the unknown. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like and subscribe to Criminal Minds True Stories for more real-life mysteries. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant.